and mainly to protect the rights of all the members. And that's the single most important. And the rights of members, a member of an assembly is entitled to full participation in its proceedings. They have the right to attend meetings, to make motions, to speak in debate, and to vote. And that's the basic fundamental rights of every member of every organization. Those individual rights cannot be taken from anyone unless, of course, they do something and they fall into a disciplinary action type of situation. Because when you're not a member in good standing, then you start seeing restrictions. Are there any questions? Meetings. In meetings, everyone is always focused on what the officers need to know and what the officers need to do. But the one thing people tend to miss is that the members attending the meetings have just as much a responsibility as the officers. So I put together 10 points of things that you need to know when you go to a meeting. You need to know who's in charge of the meeting. You need to know who the minimum essential officers are. You need to know what will be covered during that meeting. You need to have knowledge of what's in your governing documents, and that's really important. You need to know how business is introduced in a meeting. You need to know the steps to making a motion, and that's real important. You need to know the rules of debate and decorum. You need to know what is required in the minutes. You need to know the writing and handling of reports. And lastly, you need to have the points to remember somewhere in the back of your head, because knowing all those 10 points will help you to function well in a meeting. A lot of times people get really frustrated because they're sitting there, they don't know what's going on, they may be too timid to ask questions. But one thing I always say, when you're getting ready to vote on a motion, if you don't understand what you're voting on, raise your hand and ask, because the worst thing in the world you could do is vote for something and you really don't know what you're voting for. And then the assembly they have to deal with the fact that the motion may have passed and it was something that really should have been challenged. So, who's in charge of the meeting? Who do you all think is in charge of the meeting?
The member.
Can I say me? Sorry.
Who said me?
Melanie.
One of the
Who said members?
Whoever called the
I
meeting.
said the members.
Who said members?
Tracy.
Okay, Tracy. Now, how many agree with Melanie that the president is in charge?
I don't agree with me.
What did you say? You don't agree with you?
No, because I agree with Tracy. It's the members.
Does everyone agree with Tracy?
It's the voting members.
Yes.
Well, when you say when you say in charge of the meeting, is that who's running the meeting?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. But there is a feeling of being in charge when you can say what you want to say in debate, when you can talk in a motion, when you can do all of the things that another person may be restricted from doing. So how does everyone feel with agreeing with what Tracy said, the members?
In that sense, I would say members.
Yeah, members.
Okay. Members. You, the members, and that is right, because the presiding officer cannot say what she really wants to say during a meeting.
That's the truth.
She has to be impartial. The members can speak in debate. They can make motions. They can stand up and they can just say what they want to say and get it over with. Whereas the president has to kind of bite her tongue or relinquish the chair. So you all were right. That's pretty good, because I always get responses like it's either the president, the parliamentarian, or the sergeant at arms. Now the parliamentarian, like the president, has to remain impartial. They can't speak in debate. They cannot vote unless the vote is by ballot. And unlike the parliamentarian, the president, if the president does want to engage in debate, she can get up and relinquish the chair to the vice president. The parliamentarian has to sit there and tough it out, or they can ask the president for permission to greet or speak to the assembly, because the parliamentarian's job is only to advise the presiding officer. How many people knew that?
I
Maybe.
knew
Who's that?
I didn't know that they could not speak or debate. I didn't know that that was their only job.
No, that's it. They can, a lot of times when a parliamentary inquiry is made, the president can defer to the parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian can address the assembly by responding. Or when someone asks a question, anyone asks a question, the parliamentarian can be allowed to speak by the president. But as far as just sitting at the parliamentarian's chair and shouting out during the meeting, that's a no-no. And I've heard of several organizations that the parliamentarian is always running his or her mouth, and that's not supposed to happen. So, who are the minimum essential officers in a meeting?
Board?
Huh?
Is it the board or the officers, the 4 officers of the meeting, at the meeting?
The
Well,
Secretary, treasurer, president.
The president and the secretary to me.
Okay,
who said the president and the secretary?
Tracy.
Okay, Tracy, I'm gonna put you in the category with Sharon.
All right, I'll mute.
The minimum essential officers, and there are only 2. The president to preside, and the secretary to record the proceedings, which are the minutes. And just like knowing that a quorum is present when the president calls the meeting to order, the president also needs to wait until the secretary is there. Because in order for the meeting to really take off, you gotta have a quorum and your 2 minimum essential officers. And if they're not there, someone has to be there in their stead. Any questions?
Mm-mm.
What will be covered at the meeting? Now, how do you know what is going to be covered during your meetings?
Refer to the agenda?
Agenda.
Absolutely. The order of business is the correct term for agenda. The items in red are the actual items that are necessary for the agenda. Everything else is either optional or it's a custom. Believe it or not, the call to order is a custom. Every organization across the country customarily puts call to order, but it's not a required entry. The first required entry are the minutes, the reading and approval of the minutes. And the way we remember the required entries is called Mrs. Sun. So you start out with the call to order, opening ceremony, which is optional, roll call, which is optional, because if you're in a big group, you're not going to sit there and call 500 names. Minutes is your first required entry. Correspondence is optional. Reports of the officers, boards, and standing committees. S is for special ad hoc committee reports. S is for special orders. U for unfinished business, and that is only when you have it. You don't put unfinished business on your agenda if you don't have it. And the one way to tell if a presiding officer is on top of their game is if they're not calling for unfinished business. Because when you say, is there any unfinished business, everybody knows you don't know what you're doing. Because you, as the presiding officer, know if there is any unfinished business left over from a previous meeting or postponed to that current meeting, that's going to come up on the agenda. New business is required. That's always going to be there for anything that may not have been covered on the agenda that you can add at that point. But it should be something that will automatically lead to maybe a motion being made. If not, it's just an announcement and it can be shared during announcements. And custom is announcements, and adjournment is a custom. And that, I'm sure somebody is saying, well, why is adjournment a custom? Because you always need to have adjournment on your agenda. No, you don't. And you don't need a motion to adjourn.
Deborah, you're talking a lot about customs. Do you want to explain what a custom is?
Sure, customs, and I should have had that early in the presentation. A custom is something that an organization always has done through the years. It may be against parliamentary law. It may be against rules of the bylaws, but it's a custom that everyone has allowed the presiding officer and the group to get away with. So they just customarily do that. And it is to fall to the ground when someone challenges it. Because if there's a custom that really goes against parliamentary law, and someone, maybe you have a new member in your chapter that may be a little well-versed in parliamentary law and will raise their hand and challenge that custom, that's when you have to straighten it up. Are there any questions on what a custom is?
I don't have a question about customs, but I have a question. What is special orders? Like, what would that be?
Special orders is something that you put in your, let me see. A special order would be like having an election. And you put it around your unfinished business, or it actually should go, an election should go high in the meeting. But it is considered a special order because it's something that takes place at a specific time during a meeting.
So Deborah, two questions related to what you just said. If you're doing an election, wouldn't it be in the nominating committee's report, which would be under the standing committee's report?
Well, the election is separate from the, what was that? The election is separate from the nominating committee's report. The nominating committee's report takes place before the election. Right. Because they have to give the slate of officers, and they have to assist the presiding officer in nominations from the floor. But election is separate from the nominating committee's report. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. On unfinished business, it moved. On the unfinished business thing, I guess
you want me to go back?
No, I'm okay. I just noticed it was gone. So, like, I know of members that have necessarily not told the president that they had an issue with something that happened in the previous meeting, and they bring it up in unfinished business. That shouldn't be happening?
No. Okay. Because that's not unfinished business. If they have a problem with something that happened during a meeting, it's a moot point at the next meeting. When you have a problem with something that happens in a meeting, it needs to be brought up right then. That is considered a point of order.
Okay.
If there's a breach in the rules or something that went down that you may not have understood, or something that wasn't clear, that's when you stop the presiding officer and either say a point of order or just have a parliamentary question.
Okay.
If it's dealing with parliamentary law, then it's a parliamentary inquiry. I rise to a parliamentary inquiry.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Now, have knowledge of your governing documents. What are your governing documents?
Bylaws.
Yeah,
Bylaws.
there's that word. Bylaws is something that everyone should have a copy of when they're in an organization. You may not be able to read it all and understand it, but there are some things in those documents that you really should have in your mind when you go to a meeting. So it's what you should know. These are the points that you should know in your bylaws. No Mommy Si Pa is the 9 basic articles found in bylaws. And generally, when they follow those 9 basic rules, they're really easy to read. Those 9 basic articles, they're really easy to read. A lot of organizations add more, and they can do that, but they should still follow this same thing. That's name, object, members, officers, meetings, executive committee or board of directors, committees, parliamentary authority, and amendment. That's what that stands for. And the easiest way to remember it is just say no Mommy Si Pa. When you try to pass the RP exam, you come up with every easy trick in the book to remember stuff, because that's the hardest test in the world.
Can you break that down one more time?
Sure. Say what that stands for.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Name, N is name, O is object or purpose. Sometimes you'll see it as purpose. The first M is members. You got to have members before you have meetings. So it's members, officers, meetings, executive committee or board of directors, committees, which they can be broken up into standing committees or special committees. P is for parliamentary authority, and A is for amendments. And those 2 should always be there. You should always know your organization's parliamentary authority, in which case you all is the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order. And can anybody tell me what the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order is besides Sharon? And I'm sure Tracy might know the answer to that too. What is the current edition?
It was in the
And
email.
newly
I know
revised.
it was in the email, but I don't have it open.
Just
It's
blurt it out.
Newly revised, I think.
Huh?
Newly revised?
No, that's not the edition number.
Oh, wait. Second
12th
edition.
12th edition?
The 12th edition, yes. The second edition of Robert's Rules in Brief. Because the second edition of Robert's Rules of Order was way back in the 1800s.
Hey, Deborah, just to interject,
Try that one. Huh?
I wanted everyone to know that I did start recording the presentation, so it will be available for you guys afterwards. And unfortunately, I thought about it like 5 minutes in, so I didn't get the very beginning of it, but pretty much after that, everything is recorded.
Okay, so the purpose.
I have a
or the object is a short statement of why your organization exists. You should always know why you exist and what your purpose is, what services you may provide to either your constituents or people that you serve.
Hey, Deborah? I
Uh-huh.
have one other question regarding the nomenclature.
No mommy sipa. Uh-huh.
Nomenclature. Is that the order that the bylaws are supposed to be laid out in, or is that just supposed to be the information that's in there?
That is the order that they should be laid out in. You can't really tell an organization how to lay out their governing documents, but when they're laid out with those 9 articles in that particular order, they're so much easier to read. Because the worst thing in the world is for you to look for something that should be in membership and find it way in the back of your bylaws. Everything has a logical order. The quorum, you should always know what your organization's quorum is, because a lot of times the members may be a little bit more willing to look around and say, uh-oh, we've lost a quorum. And you need to make sure that you have a quorum. Because when you don't have a quorum, that means that there are things that you may need to vote on that you really shouldn't. You also need to know how you elect your officers. Do you elect your officers by a majority vote? Do you elect your officers by a plurality vote? And that's important. Roberts suggests that officers should be elected by majority vote. However, if you're an organization that's lucky enough to have more than 2 people running for any given office, it may be better to have plurality, because the highest vote getter will end that election. If nobody gets a majority vote, you have to keep balloting until a majority is attained. And sometimes that can be all night.
I wish we had that problem.
You should have an idea of what your officers and their duties are. And make sure that you have all of the officers that you need. Because if you have in your bylaws, your organization has a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer, and you don't have all of those officers, you're going against your governing documents. You also need to know the power of your board of directors. Can the presiding officer give your board directives? Can the board operate when the organization is not in meetings or not in session? What can the board do? What are their powers? So you should have an idea of what that is. You must know who your parliamentary authority is. And when it's not in your bylaws, then when you have a problem, you have to point out who you want to have as a parliamentary authority, so you'll know how to address the problem that you're dealing with. And that can be another problem when you don't have it in there. You also need to know how your bylaws are amended. Do you have to send out proposed amendments so many days in advance? Is a notice necessary, or how it's done? Are there any questions?
Deborah, you want me to send this presentation out to everyone as well, correct?
Yes, afterwards. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Deborah, is there a difference between a board of directors and the executive committee?
Technically, not really. It's
Okay.
just terminology. A lot of times a 501c3 organization will use board of directors. And a social or any other type of deliberative assembly will use executive board, executive committee. It just depends on what terminology you all select to use. But
Okay,
technically, the makeup is pretty much the same. Your elected officers and sometimes your standing committee chairman are members of your board.
okay, so
All of that
you said
needs to
something
be spelled out in your bylaws.
I'm sorry, Deborah, you said something that just triggered something else. Executive committee and executive board, is that the same thing as well?
Technically, no. A lot of times, well, I always use this logic. I'll say executive board when it's just your officers. I'll say executive committee when it's your officers and your committee chairman. Any other questions? Is that all? Okay, number 5, how business is introduced in a meeting. So how do you think business is introduced in a meeting?
Aren't you supposed to call for permission or something to speak? To address the, I don't know what you call leadership, but to address the office or something?
Well, yeah, but that's not the answer I'm looking for. But you should always rise and get permission from the presiding officer before you speak, especially when you do this. Can anybody else take a stab at that answer? It's making a motion. The definition of a motion is a formal proposal by a member in a meeting that the group takes certain action. And that's how you introduce business in a meeting. The steps to making a motion.
Okay, Deborah, go back to, like, what's an example of that introduction for number 5? Like, okay, so introducing, or how is business introduced? So I have something that I want to say, how do I make a motion to do that? Like, how do you say
A
it?
lot of times when you're following an agenda and there's a report given, there may be a recommendation in that report that the committee, I'm gonna say committee because if it's an officer and they have a recommendation, someone else has to handle that. But if it's a committee report and there is something in that committee report that is an action item, a motion has to be made. Or if you're going down the agenda and it's new business and you personally have something you want to introduce, say maybe you want to introduce, for example, a trip maybe you want the group to take, and you present your trip and then you have an action item to talk about the trip and how everyone could possibly, go and enjoy it. But you would have to have an action item by, off the cuff, I'm trying to think of what would be the best, what would be the best way to, okay, I'll go back to my old favorite. Say, for example, you are a committee chair and you were given a computer that was passed down from the previous chair and something happened that it broke. You would stand up during new business and say that maybe you're having a challenge with the computer and you'd like to know if you can get a new computer. So your motion would be, I move that the organization purchase the fundraising committee a new computer, or the PR committee a new computer because the computer has died or something. But anything that would have an action item would be how you're introducing new business in a meeting or how you're introducing business in a meeting. It's basically a motion no matter how it's introduced, either by a member or a committee or even an officer.
Okay.
Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Because if you don't, let me know.
Is it only done during new business time, or is
No,
it? Okay, all right.
Motions come up throughout the meeting. There may be correspondence that you may have gotten from one of your other chapters. They may be having something and they want you all to purchase tickets. Someone can stand and raise their hand and say, Madam President, I move that we purchase 2 tickets for the president and a guest to attend the Kansas City chapter's event, or something like that.
Okay. I get it.
You okay?
Yes.
Okay, now if you're not, let me know. Steps to making a motion. There are 6 steps in making a motion. It sounds like a lot, but it really isn't once you get it and once you master it. Oops. After standing to obtain the floor, you simply say, I move that. You stand, wait for recognition from the presiding officer, and say, I move that we purchase a new laptop computer. Someone has to second the motion. When the motion is made, in most cases, because there are some cases a motion does not require a second. This shows that at least 2 members want the proposal to be considered. They may not necessarily both agree with it, but they do want the floor to talk about it. So that's why a lot of times a motion will require a second. The chair states the question. He or she says, it is moved and seconded that we purchase a laptop computer. And the next thing she does is says, is there any debate or is there any discussion? Some organizations say, is there any unreadiness? I think that's the most negative term and I don't like it. You should always say, is there any debate or is there any discussion? At the end of debate, the chair calls for the vote. He puts the question, which is, he restates it by saying, the question is on the adoption of a motion that we purchase a laptop computer, or the motion before you is that we purchase a laptop computer. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. And the last is the chair announces the result of the vote by declaring that the motion was either adopted or lost, and explains the action that will be taken by the group as a result of the vote.
Hey, Deborah,
So
you want to
uh-huh.
what the question is, because you're referencing question.
Question is the motion. The motion, once the chair restates the question and puts it on the floor. Let me go back a few steps. Once the chair states the question, it then becomes a question. I should say, once the chair restates the motion, it then becomes a question.
And that's just the parliamentary language that you use.
Right, that's just a parliamentary term.
Mm-hmm.
The chair states the question, and he says it is moved and seconded that we. Once he does that, that motion no longer belongs to the maker of the motion, and it belongs to the assembly. Because a lot of times people think when they've made a motion and something is said that maybe people don't like the motion, if the chair has already put it on the floor, has stated it, and it has become a question, it cannot be withdrawn. It has to be voted up or voted down. Everybody understand that? Okay. So who wants to try making a motion right quick? It could be on anything you decide you want to do.
Okay, I'm just gonna make up something, but I'll.
Yeah, make up something.
All right, I move that the Chicago chapter goes out to a nice dinner once a month.
I second it.
Madam Chair,
It has been moved and second that the Chicago chapter goes out for a nice meal once a month.
okay, now let me stop you right there
Okay.
because I know you're preparing for the good old RP test. You must say it is moved and seconded.
It is moved, and I said it was moved.
It has been.
Okay.
I think
It
is moved and seconded.
Okay, it is moved and second that the Chicago chapter goes out for a nice meal once a month. Is there any debate?
No.
Are you ready for the question?
Yes, there is a
I have a question.
Okay.
Who's going to buy? Who's going to pay?
Now that's a good question.
I thought so.
Very good question. I like
Because if Chicago's buying, I'm coming up for dinner.
That's what I was about to say, the same thing. I was going to say, are other chapters included?
And can
I did say
vagabonds come?
She said the Chicago chapter.
I did.
And what is the dinner? Are we talking White Castle or steak? What are we talking
I
about?
said nice dinner, so.
You did say nice dinner. That was stated in the motion.
Okay.
Classic restaurant by the sea.
Go back a slide.
Aaron has deep pockets.
So I guess, when you make the motion, do you have to be specific on who's, I
As
guess. who's gonna-
specific as possible, because what you're going to do when you're not, you're going to open your motion up to perhaps being amended,
Right.
because then you want to get into the specifics.
Okay. So when you make a motion, you have to be specific on where, who, and how much, or at least try to.
If possible. I can't say that all motions would definitely be like that, but if possible, yes.
Okay, so in this case, Melanie asked the questions and then we rebutted and said, no, it's the Chicago chapter. We didn't answer the other questions. Does that need to be answered about how much and
Yes, in debate, yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So in the debate, Deborah, is that just a back and forth discussion and we hash it out?
Yes,
Yeah.
back and forth discussion. However, there are rules in debate, and we'll get into those a little bit down the line.
Okay.
So everybody can't just blurt out. Your comments have to go to and through the president. And I'll explain that comment in a minute. But anyway, is there further discussion?
Can you go back a slide? Good. Okay.
So Deborah, okay, never mind. Yeah, further discussion. It's not about the amendment. I'm more concerned about or curious about the language that you told Sharon she had to state it in.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference between it is moved and second versus it has been moved and seconded?
Because it has been moved is like a past tense.
But it was past tense. We did do it a second ago.
This is current. It is moved and seconded. You're doing this now, so.
So you're saying you're restating it now, because I'm doing it now. I'm not saying what was, I'm saying what I'm doing currently.
But you have to say it correctly, and the correct terminology is it is moved and seconded.
So it has to be in present tense.
Right.
Technically, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
so it has been moved and seconded on a test that you take with NAP, you will not pass it.
Okay, so we had the discussion and debate, the questions or whatever. Then what's the next step after the question has come up for debate and we answered it? Then what happens next, or what does the chair say then?
The chair says, is there further discussion? Hearing none, are you ready for the question? They can say that, or are you ready for the vote? They should restate the motion to make sure everybody is aware of what they're voting for.
Okay.
And if discussion has gone on and on and on, someone may call for the question. Are you all familiar with the call for the question? The correct terminology of that is previous question. That is the motion made to end debate. When the question has been called for, that motion has to be seconded, and it can either be carried out in a rising vote because it requires a 2/3 vote for its adoption, or the chair can simply say, if there is no objection, we will go back to the pending question. Hearing no objection, the motion is on the adoption of blah, blah, blah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Is everybody with me?
That's a lot.
So it's basically just trying to get clarity on the question at hand at that particular point. Once the discussion or it has been discussed, you basically restating the question with those, I guess, confirming those new discussions?
Well, no. What I did was the debate had gone on long and somebody got tired and decided to move the previous question. That is the motion made to end the debate. You might have heard it as, I call for the question, or I move the question, or somebody just stood up and shouted question. The proper way to make that motion is to raise your hand, be recognized by the chair, and say, I move the previous question. Because it does have to be seconded. And it should actually be taken a vote. However, you can go past the vote by saying, if there is no objection, we will go back to the pending motion. And if anybody is going to object, they can raise their hand then and say, I object. And if that happens, you have to take the vote on the previous question, which again, I said it takes 2/3 vote to adopt. So that means that everyone has to either raise their hand or they have to stand and be counted. Because you really can't take a 2/3 vote in a voice vote.
So in our example that we just did, Sharon proposed a question and Melanie, raised the question, and then we had a lot of chatter about it. So what's Sharon's next, as chair, what's her next?
What is her next recourse?
What did she say next? Yeah.
Did she respond to Melanie's question? Did she respond to Melanie's question?
Well, wouldn't the person that makes the motion be responding? Would I be responding to the questions?
As presiding officer, you would be responding.
Oh, okay.
So Sharon,
someone was giving a report.
Chapter only.
Yeah, Melanie, it is only for the Chicago chapter. Are there any further questions? No, that's not what I say. What do I say, Deborah?
Is there any further debate?
Or the question.
Is there any further debate?
And so Shamanda came in and said something about who's paying, or somebody said something about who's paying. So Sharon need to answer that.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is going to be paying for their own because it will not come out of the Chicago budget. Not for this year.
Okay, so then somebody else asked what type of restaurant. Somebody said, is it going to be White Castles or something? And then Yolanda responded, but then, so does Sharon need to respond as to what type of restaurant or whatever?
Yes,
or clarify?
she can remind the member that it was quoted in the motion.
Okay.
It was stated in the motion, a nice dinner.
Okay.
I may like White Castles, but I don't consider that a nice dinner. especially the stomach ache it gives me afterwards.
It is a nice dinner because we don't have them here in California. We always want one.
Now you all have In-N-Out Burger. I love In-N-Out Burger.
Yeah, okay.
So
those-
basically it's up to the president to answer those questions.
Yes.
And then it's voted on.
It's up to the president, unless, of course, someone was giving a report at the time the motion was made. And it would either be the reporting officer or the president. But in most cases, the two together would work together in addressing the questions that come up during debate.
So Deborah, what if the question that was asked, say they asked, well, how much money, how much money is it gonna cost? And they ask a question that then requires further discussion from the assembly.
Well, that's when you decide it depends on the restaurant we choose. I mean, you can't really address all of the questions.
Okay.
Because if you're not familiar with a certain restaurant's menu and maybe how much their food costs,
Yeah.
you're just not gonna always be able to respond.
Okay.
Okay,
But
so
as long as you give them something.
So Sharon answered from a chair perspective and restated the question. At this point, then what's next?
At the end of debate, the chair calls for the vote, and then she restates the question and says either the question before you or the motion before you, or the question is on the adoption of the motion that we, the Chicago chapter, go for a nice dinner once every month. I think that's how it went.
Mm-hmm.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. If the ayes have it, the motion is adopted, and the Chicago chapter will choose a nice restaurant to go out to dinner every month. Or if the noes have it, the motion is lost, and that's where you end.
Okay.
You don't always have to say, and we won't go to dinner.
Hey, Deborah,
Uh-huh.
it's Melanie. Can you say the motion has passed, or do you have to say adopted?
Well, you can say it has passed. Uh-huh. I'm familiar with the correct terminology, and I always say adopted. But the
Okay.
motion is passed is correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The
I have
rules
a
of
question
debate and
before-
decorum. Huh?
I have a question before we move on.
Okay.
So I don't know if you already mentioned it, but when do you not have to make a motion? I think you said earlier, you don't always have to make a motion?
A second motion. That's what I said.
Second a motion. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh. Because there are some motions that don't require a second.
And what
There are some that do, and maybe the assembly has gotten so advanced in their discussion, it's as though a second has been heard and it hasn't. But once that debate has started on that question, on that motion, you can just continue it on and then go on for the vote.
Can you give
And
me an
that's
example of not needing a second?
a motion that, okay, for example, a committee report that has an action item. The recommendation in a committee report, when the committee has more than one member and they have an action item in the report, and they say, at the end of the report, I move for the adoption of my report, that is actually a motion. It does not require a second because it's coming from a committee, and that committee has more than one member. There are some committees that may be a committee of one, and there are committees that have multiple members. Anytime a recommendation comes out of a committee report of more than one member, it does not require a second because it has already gone through the committee. So it just goes to the assembly in the form of a recommendation.
And you said the other example is if someone makes a motion and all of a sudden everybody just starts talking about it.
Right, they start talking about it, they jump in and start debating without even having a second. It is okay to continue on and carry that out to the point of voting. That is legal.
Okay.
Any other questions? The rules of debate and decorum. What is debate and decorum? Does anyone know?
Well, debate to me means a discussion.
Correct.
And
It is
decorum is
discussion
following
on
the
the merits of a
process.
pending motion. Every member has the right to speak and debate on every debatable motion before it is acted upon. Now, someone said something about decorum. Who said that?
Melanie? I think Melanie started to say something.
Okay.
I did. I was trying to get back to my mute button. Sorry. Decorum to me is, as you mentioned, everyone gets to speak, but they do it in a proper format, waiting their turn, waiting to be recognized, not everyone speaking at one time.
Absolutely. Decorum is how members conduct themselves during the meeting. Because, you know, there are some members, every organization has them, they come to the they come to the meeting with the sole purpose of just turning it upside down. They gotta have their name in every month's minutes. They always have to start something, and they always have to say something that just gets everybody going.
Mm-hmm.
Always wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. Don't just sit from your seat and holler out, well, I think it's so-and-so, or I move that we such and such. You should always wait to be recognized first. Each member may speak twice for 10 minutes to a motion per day, as long as there is no limit placed on debate. Time cannot be yielded to another member. And that question, I put that comment in there because for those who watched the impeachment trial and wanted to know how are they yielding their time, we've never yielded our time. That's Thomas Jefferson's parliamentary rules. And there's another that is done by the legislature. But Thomas Jefferson, I think, is what the Senate and the House uses. Yield our time. And organizations, members have the right to set limits on debate. You can have your debate be 3 minutes in length per person or 15 minutes total for everybody. It's just how you set the parameters in the motion you make to limit or extend the limits of debate.
So when is that motion made to determine how long, or is that like according to our bylaws, or what is, how do you set the
Yeah.
It's in our bylaws. Put it in your bylaws. Yes, you can put it in your bylaws. It doesn't have to be there, but you can put it in your bylaws.
If it's different than what's according to Robert's Rules of Order, which is twice for 10 minutes?
Right. Yep. And that second speech, you should always wait to make sure that everyone who wishes to speak has had the opportunity to speak before you make that second speech. The maker of a motion always has the privilege to speak first if he or she chooses to do so. So if you're the one who made the motion, the presiding officer should recognize you first when the floor is open for debate.
And with everything being virtual these days, how are people being recognized?
That depends on how the virtual rules are set up. for each meeting. Some are allowing people to unmute and talk like we are today. And you know, with our conference that we just had, we had everybody muted and they had to write in the chat. So those are rules that you establish once you set up your meeting virtually.
There's such thing already in place called virtual rules?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Did not know.
There is now. When Robert's Rules Foundation went from the 10th to the 11th edition, we started talking about electronic meetings because we knew technology was taking us toward electronic meetings. And a lot of us tried to encourage our clients, organizations that we are familiar with, organizations that we may be in, to put that in their bylaws. A lot of them had not done it yet, but now with the pandemic, most organizations have been violating their bylaws because they don't have electronic meetings in there. But one thing that you can say, you don't have to say that you violated your bylaws, because your governor, everybody's state governor, well, not everybody's, I'll speak for my own. My state governor put out a proclamation that organizations were able to meet virtually. And because a lot of us are run by state government, all organizations have to deal with the state and local government for the most part, especially if you're incorporated. You can use that and say that you're going by the rules that your governor or your state government has set up. Because there was really no way we could get around it. We couldn't meet face to face because of the virus. Any questions? Okay, remarks must be confined to the merits of the pending question. A member must refrain from attacking another member's motives. Avoid the use of members' names. So if Sharon gets up and says something that Jasmine doesn't like, Jasmine doesn't stand up and say, well, I don't like what Sharon just said because this is what she should have said, or this is what we want to do. You don't do that. That is definitely against having good decorum in a meeting. You stand up, you address the chair and say, I would like to make a comment about the previous speaker's statement. I disagree with it because blah, blah, blah. That's how you say that. You direct comments to the presiding officer. So that's why I said comments go to and through the presiding officer. Address a previous speaker's comments through the presiding officer. So that's the to and through. Always respect the member by speaking. Always respect the member speaking by waiting until they finish speaking before rising to be assigned the floor. So if Sharon is speaking and I'm raising my hand doing this, and Tracy decides that she wants to speak, but she waits until Sharon finishes, she will be recognized first, not me for doing this, because this is distractive and it's not good decorum in a meeting. You should always wait until the previous speaker has finished and relinquished the floor before you rise and try to get the floor.
Hey, Deborah.
Uh-huh.
Just as a short reminder, it is 12:15 and we have technically about 15 minutes left. Actually, probably we have 25 minutes left because we started maybe 5 or 10 minutes late.
Okay. Okay, I'll go a little faster.
No worries.
Be seated if you're speaking and you're interrupted by the chair. So if the chair decides they need to say something to interject a thought, just sit down in your seat until the chair is finished. Refrain from disturbing the assembly by whispering, laughing in the back, or passing notes, or, you know, just doing something that might be disruptive to the assembly.
So I'm sorry, quick question before we head off of that. Is it proper decorum to say when you rise to speak, I ask that you vote this particular motion down because of XYZ?
If you're in debate, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Especially if you feel that there is a reason why the assembly should not vote on something. Now is the time to talk when that motion is being debated, because once that motion is adopted, it's too late. It can be reconsidered, but if you had information to stop it from being adopted, you should always give it before the motion is adopted. That's a very good question, huh?
Another quick one, the bullet point that says be seated if you're speaking and you're interrupted by the chair. So do you ever get the chance to come back, or once the chair
starts
speaking? Oh, okay.
Yes, a lot of times they may interrupt you because either something has come to their attention, or they may want to interject a thought into what you're saying. You may want to sit down for a second, and, you know, depending on the length of the statement, it may be a quick statement, or it may be something that is lengthy. If it is, that's when you be seated, and then when they finish, you can finish what you're saying. And that shouldn't cut into your time.
Do they invite you back, or you just go back to the podium? Or
you remind the presiding officer that you weren't finished if they are looking at you like, why are you standing there? Okay, what is required in the minutes? The first paragraph of the minutes should contain the following information: the kind of meeting, whether it's a regular meeting, special, adjourned regular, or adjourned special. The name of the society or assembly. The date, time, and place of the meeting, if it's not the regular place, or you can say the met at the regular meeting place. The fact that the regular chairman and secretary were present, or in their absence, the names of the persons who substituted for them were present. And whether the minutes of the previous meeting were read and approved as read or as corrected. And the date of that meeting, if it was other than a regular business meeting. The reason why is because when the minutes are adopted, they become a legal document. And if anything happens to your organization that someone has called in an attorney, the first thing they're going to do is subpoena your minutes. So you always want your minutes to be accurate. You always want them to say what is the first things on your the required in your minutes. You always want that to start out, because that way everybody gets a clear view of when this meeting took place, who was in charge of the meeting, who took the minutes, and whether the minutes were approved as read, approved as received, approved as corrected, or what. But that is definitely needed in your minutes at all times. For a meeting, the secretary should always have the minutes from the past 3 meetings. Now, this here is an opinion. It's not, you'll never find it in Robert's rules. But when I was the secretary for my sororities chapter, for whatever reason, during that administration, someone always wanted to challenge something that happened way back months before. And you can do that. There's no statute of limitations on correcting minutes. You can correct the minutes from 2013 today. If somebody was reading them and saw that there was an error in those minutes, and they knew it was an error and could prove it, they could bring that up at a meeting and have it approved as something previously adopted, amended as something previously adopted. So you can always do that. But a secretary should have multiple minutes from meetings with her, because that way, if they're looking for something and maybe 1, 2, or 3 meetings back, and you have the minutes with you, you can look it up and you have it right there, and you can put that question to bed right away. Minutes should contain what was done during the meeting, not what was said. You never write a whole litany of so-and-so said this, blah, 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 blah. Your officers and committee chairmen should give you written reports so you can put them with the minutes. You can put maybe an excerpt from that report and just put under it or put beside it, report on file. So if anyone needs to look at that report, they can see the secretary and get a copy of that and see what was in that report. So minutes should always contain what was done, not what was said. If a motion was made, who the maker of the motion was, it doesn't matter who the seconder was, but you always need to know what the outcome was, if the motion was adopted or if it was lost. All reports should be written and given to the secretary to file and bound at the end of the year. And one thing that I forgot to include is reports should be written in the third person. They should never be written to say I or me or something like that. It should always be your president said blah, blah, blah. Your secretary did blah, blah, blah. Something like that. But it should always be in the third person.
Do you include names?
Names of who?
The people.
You
Like-
can.
Okay.
But if you are the officer or the committee chairman writing the report, you wouldn't need to put your name. You would say your chairman or your president, blah, 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 your vice president, whatever.
I was referring to like in the minutes.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
You put the name of the maker of the motion. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All motions and their outcomes must be in the minutes. The name of the maker of the motion must be in the minutes. The name of the seconder is not necessary. Writing and handling reports. Are there any other questions on minutes before we go on? Officer and committee reports are best received when they are 1 page in length. They should always be short and concise. Because when a person stands up and gives a 4-page report, I guarantee you have lost your listeners. And if they paid you, you couldn't tell what the person was saying. Officer reports should provide a brief description of what the officer is reporting on. Annual reports should be more detailed. Action items in an officer's report cannot be moved by the reporting officer. Another member must move for the adoption of that officer's report. And again, it should be written in the third person. The treasurer's report, when given, is for information only. It never requires a motion to adopt, and it is just filed for audit, and it's not necessary to say the treasurer's report is filed for audit, because you know it is.
So I have a question.
Okay.
So when the treasurer goes through her report, then that's it. She doesn't have to move that it's approved? Okay,
Not at all.
okay.
Not at all. Because it's just for information purposes only. The only time a finance report needs to be adopted is when it's the audit report.
Okay.
Committee reports. The date of the last meeting, how many members were in attendance, and the purpose of the meeting are key points that need to be in the report. And you must give the number of people so everyone will know that when you say, I move for the adoption of my report, that was a multiple person meeting, so a second is not required. That's the key right there. When a committee is charged with a task, when a committee charged with a task decides how they are going to proceed, they list what they've investigated in planning. Then they recommend their choice and usually explain why. That choice becomes the committee's recommendation, which is an action item, and the chair or the reporting officer can move for the adoption of the report. Once adopted, that recommendation or whatever choice the assembly selects becomes the choice of the assembly. And the reason why I wrote that like that is because, say for example, the committee is the fundraising committee and they looked at 3 hotels, the Hilton, the Hyatt, and the Marriott. The committee decided to recommend the Hyatt. A member stands and says, well, I know that Hyatt has an outbreak of bed bugs. I don't think we should use the Hyatt. Even though the committee recommended the Hyatt, it doesn't mean that the assembly has to take the recommendation. If the assembly provides information that the committee may not be aware of in their recommendation, they can always stand and say it and say why they're not going to vote on that recommendation. They're going to select another location. So because the committee has recommended something, it doesn't always become the assembly's choice. That's the point I'm just trying to make. Everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay. Points to remember. Members must always be recognized by the president before speaking and can only speak twice to the same question on the same day. All comments must go to and through the president. Discussion must be germane to the pending motion on the floor. In voting, when the ayes sound unanimous, the noes still must be taken, and abstentions are not counted. And that is a state-by-state thing. In the state of Illinois, abstentions are not counted. So I don't know about any place else. I do know in the state of Missouri, they are counted. So moved should never be used to make a motion. The maker of the motion has a right to speak first if they desire to do so. The main motion is a motion made when no other business is pending. The motion to amend is made when a main motion needs to be modified. A motion can only be amended twice. They are the primary and secondary amendments, or they can be called the amendment in the first degree and the amendment in the second degree. Unfinished business is only required on your agenda when you actually have it. And that ends my presentation. Are there any questions? Any other questions?
So unfinished business is something that came up in a previous meeting and kind of just gotten forgotten about. So you would just bring it up again?
Well, technically, it's not forgotten about. Say, for example, you're in a meeting and maybe your time has come up that you had to end the meeting. And you still have some items on your agenda that have not been covered.
Okay.
You would plan another meeting. That would be an adjourned meeting. And then that would come up as unfinished business because those were the items of business that you didn't get to.
Oh, okay.
Say, for example, maybe there was something that required the committee go back and look at it a little bit further, and it was postponed. The motion to postpone to a certain time was made to postpone it to the September 19th meeting. Then it would come up under unfinished business as something that was carried over from a previous meeting. Now, a lot of times when people postpone something, they use the wrong motion. They say, well, we should table this until our next meeting. That's a no-no. The motion to table should only be used to temporarily set something aside to take up something else of more importance at the time. When that item of business is complete, it requires another motion to take it from the table. A lot of people think when they table something, it's going to come up at the next meeting as unfinished business. No, it isn't. If a motion is not made to take it from the table, it's going to die on the table because it can only sit on the table for so long. Any other questions?
So as a question about like the flow of the meeting. So say the committee gives a report. Are they technically, because we haven't been doing written reports for a while. We did it for a while, but then we sort of stopped. So should the reports be written and then that committee chairperson read their report and at the end of their report, make a recommendation, make a motion based on if they had recommendations? And if they make that motion, that's how then the discussion starts?
Yes. A report should always be written because it should be included with your minutes.
Okay.
And that should be how you get your historic data from your organization, is by looking back over your minutes, because you should bound them at the end of the year and put them all together. But I was trying to remember what else you said, because you said something that I wanted to address.
Well, I said, do they, after they read their report, do they then, if they have recommendations, then?
Yes. They should always read their written report, and that recommendation should be included at the end of that report. And when that recommendation is there, they end the report by saying, and I move for the adoption of my report. If it's just for information only, you can either display it on the screen or you can pass out the reports. They don't actually have to be read. They should only need to be read if there is an action item.
So I'm thinking like we're currently working with Jackie, wave Jackie, our member and her committee on planning the virtual membership drive, right? And so as we're planning that, every month, for the last, say, month and a half or two, we've been back and just sort of discussing it as a chapter in terms of how we want to do it. And I'm just not clear on how just general discussion happens, or if general discussion doesn't happen, or is all discussion is driven by emotion.
Most of it should be. However, it's not bad to just sit and talk about something, especially if you're trying to get like plans together for the membership drive. But early in Roberts, one comments that's made is all discussion should lead to a motion. In most organizations that may be true, but in some, not always. So really, it depends on the organization.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So Deborah, I have a quick question about friendly amendments. What are those? Because you said there were primary and secondary. What's a friendly amendment?
A friendly, I'm glad you asked that question, because this is the first time in a long time I didn't include it on my presentation, because that is a question that comes up a lot. And depending on who in NAP you talk to, they'll tell you there really is no such thing as a friendly amendment. An amendment is an amendment. But a friendly amendment is an amendment that is made, say, for example, Sharon rises to make a motion. I move that we purchase a laptop computer. And you, Tracy, you decide to, why don't we make it an HP laptop computer? As long as the presiding officer has not said it is moved and seconded that we purchase a laptop computer, you can make that as an amendment to the motion without it actually being an amendment. You've just modified a main motion in the early stages of its being.
Oh, okay.
But
So-
once it is actually put on the floor, you can't make a you have to make an amendment. What is that? It has to be amended properly. And that's by moving to amend by adding HP in front of laptop.
So the friendly part would be before it's seconded.
Or it's
And then-
stated before,
Before it's
right.
stated.
Technically, you're making it at the same time the person is saying second.
So do you have to ask that person beforehand? Like,
Yes.
that's when the friendly part, okay. Okay, thank you.
Right. The person can either say, oh, I don't know if I want you to add laptop. Add HP. Maybe she wants Dell, who knows? But anyway, that's what a friendly amendment is. Any
Okay.
other questions?
Thank you.
Deborah, would you just give them a little information about the study groups?
I sure will. I just wanted to show them the new books.
Right.
As of August the 28th, the 11th edition has retired. So we are now in the 12th edition, and we will be here until 2030. Now, the Chicagoland area has 2 suburban parliamentary units. The Marjan Suburban Parliamentary Unit meets on the second Monday of each month, normally at the South Holland Library, which is at 16250 South Wausau, at 7 p.m. The Moraine Valley Unit meets on the 4th Saturday of each month, normally at the Bridgeview Park District facility, located at 8100 South Oketo, which is 2 blocks west of Harlem in Bridgeview. But because of the pandemic, we have been meeting on Zoom. And now our members have just commingled. Marjan members attend Moraine Valley members attend Marjan, because it's a way of getting your parliamentary study going while we're in the pandemic. And we've been doing a lot of fun things online. And it's gotten to the point where if the library ever opens up again, I don't know if we'll go back. Because we've had a lot better participation.
Yeah.
Because being on Zoom, everybody can do it from the comforts of their own home, and you're all invited to join us. All I need for you to do is just send Sharon your email addresses so she can get them to me and I can add you to the distribution. And normally to join Marjan, I believe our dues are $15 for the year. Moraine Valley is $10, but because we've been meeting on Zoom for the since March, we haven't paid dues this year. I just haven't even taken it. Said what doesn't matter. Everybody's just trying to keep their sanity, trying to keep their parliamentary study going. And we've been just having a lot of fun. And I invite all of you to join us if you'd like to.
And the Roberts Rules in Brief, if anybody wants to order that, how should we go about it?
You can either order that, you can either order it from Amazon, or you can order it from the NAP online store as non-members, or you can get a member to order it for you at their member discount. Sharon is a member. So that's,
and also, one last question is that I know that we have been looking at another book that I think was distributed. Yolanda, what was the name of the other book?
The one that I got from a convention a few years ago.
Right. Oh, he has it on the screen.
Oh, yes,
Are
that one.
Gore's Guide. What is
Oh,
that? I've never, who is that by?
Sue Goers was our parliamentarian for about 10, 15 years, but she always followed Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay. I've never seen that book, The Goer's Guide. I'm trying to get it so I can see it up close. Who is the author?
Well, Sue Goers, she probably took the information
Goers,
from,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Yep. Well, there are so many parliamentary authorities out there. I'm a member of both NAP and AIP. And AIP, the American Institute of Parliamentarians, has 4 different, well, Roberts is one of them, but they have 3 additional parliamentary authorities that we have to learn as members. And that's the Standard Code, which was formerly Alice Sturgis, the Standard Code. After her death, her family sold the rights to AIP, so now it's the American Institute of Parliamentarian Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure. And it's Demeter's and I think, what was the 4th one? I can't remember now. What were you about to say?
I was going to say for the people who have the Goers book, do they also need the Roberts Rules, like in brief, or do you
Yes,
not know?
because I don't know anything about the Goer's Guide. And anyone preparing for the membership exam would have to take the in brief, because the questions on the exam are taken from the first 11 chapters of In Brief.
I have the 2nd edition of the Robert's Rule of Orders in brief. Is there an updated edition?
Yes. The 3rd edition. The 3rd edition came out on the 28th of August.
So we need that one to do the membership class. We need the updated version.
Yes. Now you can, I have an order placed for 30 copies because I'm going to be starting 2 membership classes soon. I was going to start them in September, but now that the books are on back order and the new test is coming out October 1st, I have to wait because we have to go by the new book. So as soon as I get my 30 copies, you can buy one from me.
And can you also tell them if they want to become a member, what is required? Because I don't think they all know about what the membership exam is about.
The membership exam, like I said, is taken from the first 4, is a 40 question, there are 2, the 40 question exam and the 100 question exam. The 40 questions are taken from the first 11 chapters of Robert's Rules in Brief, the 3rd edition. Once you pass that with a score of 85% or better, you become a member, and then it's up to you whether you want to move on and be a credentialed member by becoming a registered parliamentarian, or if you want to just remain a regular member, but continue your parliamentary study. And it's an ongoing study process. You can't, when you get in there, just say, well, I'm in now, I don't have to study anymore. It's a perpetual learning experience. You're always going to have something new to learn. And one of the deficits I'm reaching with now is the edition has changed. There are 89 changes between the 11th and the 12th edition. And I have to learn what those changes are before I can really start teaching from the new book. Because I don't want to steer you with my 11th edition knowledge and the 12th edition it's changed. That would not be doing you a good service. Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Deborah and Sharon. I really appreciated this. It was very informative, and I can't wait to get the presentation and work with my ladies with it.
Okay, she has the handout. I just asked her not to give it to you all because I was going to be asking questions. But if you want the actual slides, I can give those to Sharon and she can send them.
Yeah, the slides would be perfect.
Okay.
And
I can
Melanie,
see.
to Nancy to send out to all the chapters so they can just have it, you know?
Yeah, and I'd like to put it up on our website if possible.
Okay, we'll work.
Thank you.
All righty.
Thank you, ladies, for inviting me.
Thank you,
Thank
Deborah.
you. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah.
All
You're
right.
welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.